So you guys are here because you want to get better at lubing your switches, and hopefully I have the right tutorial for you. So let's not waste any time on an intro or why I think switches should be lubed. I'm sure there's enough of that online already. Let's dive right into the structure of this guide today. So first things first, we're going to teach you how to lube your switch, which is a pretty basic, straightforward section. And next we have the do's and don'ts of lubing switches. Think of this more of a common mistake section and what to avoid when lubing your switches. And I'll keep it 100 with you guys. That's probably the most important part of this guide. And finally, I have a very small section of tips and tricks that you can do if you're facing some common issues. So let's kick this into gear. You'll need a brush, whatever size you'll like, a switch opener, I have this one here from KB. We also have lubricant, I get mine from Kinetic Labs, and of course, your choice of switches. You can also grab a stem holder, some new springs, some films, and some tweezers if you'd like. But yeah, we have some necessary things and some optional things. So let's jump into our first step today, which is how to lube your switches. Pretty basic, grab your switch opener, and away we go. So I've been told that switch openers can be pretty daunting at first, so look for the one with more teeth. That's the one we'll be using today. The other side is meant for kill switches, which we're not using today. You're gonna wanna make sure that the legs are aligned with the prongs on the switch opener itself, and you're gonna push down in the center evenly. And just to show you guys this again, here's what it's gonna look like. You really don't need a lot of force for this, although some switches are a little bit tougher to open than others. But you'll be left with a stem, a top housing, a spring, and a bottom housing. So next we're gonna grab a bit of lube and we're gonna start lubing the bottom coils of the spring. And you can technically go a bit heavier here, although I don't like seeing any white residue from the lube at all. Once this is done, you're gonna grab the lube side facing down and put that part into the bottom housing of the switch. And we're not gonna be lubing the inside of the bottom housing today, which I'll explain more in detail later. Next though, we're gonna grab more lube and lube the top side of the spring here. Again, I don't like going too heavy, but you can. Don't feel bad if you do. So next up is the stem, and we're gonna grab a little bit of lube here and evenly coat every single side of this thing. If you have a tactile switch, I usually avoid lubing the legs because it reduces the tactility of it, which I don't like. But to stress, we want even, light coatings. And the reason why we're not lubing the bottom housing is because we have more control over how much lube we're putting here. Too many times have I seen people lube the bottom housing and the stem and get really over lubed switches. So it's just easier applying it here and we get everywhere we need to cover. Oh, and little tip, do not lube this pole over here. I'll explain why later. Next, you're gonna put this into the spring with the legs facing towards the metal leaf. And if you have your films, now is the perfect time to apply them. If you do apply your films and you're noticing they're shifting all over the place, you can readjust them as you're closing the switch. However, sometimes that's not enough and you still get some shifting of your film. All I want you guys to do is open these things up and readjust them with your finger and then close back down. And that's it, we're done lubing this switch. It's a pretty simple and easy process that I'll demonstrate again for you guys to watch. The spring needs a little bit of lube. You're just gonna lightly put this on, place it into the bottom housing, lube the top of the spring one more time. Then you're gonna lube your stem. I suggest starting with a light coat and adding more depending on the sound and feel you're going for. I prefer a medium light coat personally. Then you're gonna insert that back into the spring with the legs facing towards the leaf and close it all up and make sure it's closed properly. And overall, this is a fairly simple process on how to lube your switch effectively and honestly pretty quickly. I do them individually. I don't use things like a switch lubing station. For some reason, I find that slows me down and I like having every single part that belonged with the original switch together. I don't like mixing and matching. It's just something I don't like doing. Now, let me explain why I don't bother lubing the bottom housing. I feel it's kind of redundant since you're getting most of that coverage with the stem anyways. And to be honest, it's kind of hard to tell the difference once you've just properly lubed the stem. To show you guys that, I've lubed one with the stem plus bottom housing and one with just the stem. Try and guess which one's which. And here's the reveal. As you can tell, not much of a difference. So next up, we're gonna be starting our do's and don'ts, and this is when to apply films to your switches. Now, applying films shouldn't be a difficult thing. You're gonna wanna put the tabbed part towards where the contact leaf is, and away you go, right? Not really. Films are primarily made so you can reduce housing wobble or fill some sort of gap that's made after you've cracked open your switch for the first time. But not all switches are made equally. Some absolutely need films to help reduce that wobble, as well as even improve the sound of the switch, while other switches have great tolerances and can't even support using a film. And this is where the problem occurs. People try to force films into everything, thinking that it's almost a necessity or some sort of improvement mod for a switch. But something bad happens when you do that. When you force a film into a switch that absolutely doesn't need it, the latches or legs on the switch will actually expand, causing errors and problems when you go to mount the switch onto a plate. In some extreme cases, you can actually break an entire leg off the switch. And here's an example of a switch that absolutely does not support a film. You can just see how far those latches have expanded to. But here's an example of one that does. You can see that the latches have not moved at all. So this is something that I really recommend paying attention to as you're filming your switches. So this next part is pretty important to me, and it's why I don't like donut dipping my springs and why I don't like lubing the pole of the stem. When you do either one of these, you run the risk of getting extra lube inside the center well where the pole of the stem is supposed to go in. To me, this is just an unnecessary risk that I don't like doing with my switches, because cleaning this is very, very difficult. And honestly, it sounds quite bad too. Here's an example. So essentially what's happening here is if lubricant makes it into the bottom well where the pole of the stem goes into, it basically creates a seal/vacuum, which makes the switch not only sound kind of funky, but feel very sluggish too because of that vacuum. And in the event that you're doing this right anyways, the payoff for this is just so little that I just don't find it worth it. But on to our final section, which is some tips and tricks. And if you had a keen eye, you'll probably notice that one of my switches had a bent pin. And this is very easy to fix. All you have to do is grab your tweezers and straighten. But please keep in mind that some of these pins from different manufacturers of switches can be a little bit more delicate, so do this with caution. But if this is not working for you at all, maybe it's time to just chuck this in the bin and grab a new switch. It's always good to pick up a few extra switches just in case something like this happens. Trust me, some backups are a good thing. But once it's straightened, you can put it back into your PCB. And if you've ever noticed that your switch is just a little bit muted on the upstroke, you can actually just not put any lube right above the rail of the stem. This little section right over here. It's rare that I do this with switches personally, but when I want it to pop just a little bit more, I don't put any lube there. So the next thing we'll talk about is springs, in particular how to bag lube your aftermarket springs, which is a very fast and easy method to batch lube them all compared to individually lubing each spring. To start this process, we're gonna need some GPL 105 oil. I'm sure there are other oils, but this is my oil of choice. And we're gonna start by moving all of our springs into a bigger bag. And once this is transferred, I put about 10 to 15 drops of oil inside. I put them directly on the springs, with 1 or 2 of them being on this side of the bag. And once this is done, inflate the bag with any tool that you might have. Even your mouth is okay, but I'm using a camera lens cleaner. And then shake for about 1 minute. And that's it, we're done. While you can do this method with stock springs as well, I strongly suggest using better springs for your switches. Not only do they help with consistency issues, but some really bad stock springs have ping to them, so this is a great replacement for that. And that's pretty much what I have for you guys today. Hopefully this helps someone, and if it did, let me know in the comment section down below. This did take a little while to make and for me to get going. I really wanted to script and make sure that everything that I want to tell you guys was in this video. So if it did help you guys, follow, subscribe, whatever you guys need to do. Until next time, see ya.